People say the smell of garlic bread is comforting. For me, it only signals that someone's stolen my dinner again. The buttery aroma curled around the corners of the hallway before I even opened the front door. Most people would smile at the scent. Imagine warmth, family laughter echoing through a shared meal. My stomach didn't tighten from hunger. It clenched from knowing. I kicked off my sneakers, careful not to scrape them against the baseboard. Mom had just repainted the trim, and any scuff would become my fault like most things in this house. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the television in the living room greeted me. No clatter of forks or scraping of plates. Just the kind of silence that hides crumbs. I dropped my backpack by the coat rack and walked into the kitchen. Empty. Not just someone snacked empty, but they took everything and cleaned the crime scene empty. My lasagna, 3 layers of homemade sauce bechamel and fresh pasta I'd stayed up boiling the night before, gone. My garlic bread, golden brown with the herb butter I made from scratch, vanished. Even the foil had been thrown away, the Tupperware washed and stacked neatly in the drying rack. No evidence, just the faint, mocking scent of something I'd put my care into. I opened the fridge anyway, because that's what denial makes you do. Nothing. Not even the note I'd written in bold black Sharpie Evans. Do not touch. Of course the pen was still on the counter. Voices drifted in from the living room. Kyle's was loudest as usual, echoing through the house like he owned every square inch of it. That sauce was fire, he said, laughing. Man, Evans wasted being 17. He should open a damn restaurant. Kevin's snort followed. Yeah, maybe then we'd actually have leftovers. I leaned against the fridge door, letting it close softly behind me. My fingers curled into my palm. They weren't just eating my food. They were feeding off me, my time, my skill, my silence. I walked into the living room and neither of them bothered to look up. Kyle was wiping his fingers on a napkin like he'd just left a BBQ joint not rated his younger brother's labeled dinner. Kevin had his feet up on the coffee table, a soda can half finished beside him. Hey, I said. My voice was quiet but firm. Kyle turned his head halfway toward me, smirk already in place. What, you ate my food? He shrugged. Yeah, and I made that for myself. I labeled it. Kevin chuckled. Relax, dude. It's just food. It's not just... I cut myself off. Arguing wouldn't matter. It never did. They'd shrug. Mom would mediate in the name of peace. And Dad would sit there silent and still like a man halfway underwater. Kyle leaned back and yawned. You're seriously getting worked up over some pasta. It took me 3 hours. That's your problem. You could have just heated up something frozen like normal people. I opened my mouth to reply, but I didn't get the chance. What's going on here? Mom's voice cut in from the hallway, sharp like a lid snapping shut. I turned. She stood there with a towel in one hand, eyebrows already drawn in judgment. They ate my dinner, I said. She sighed. And I labeled it. I made it for myself. She glanced at Kyle and Kevin, then back at me. Don't be petty, Evan. You should be happy they liked it. You're so talented with food. Can't you just make more? Her smile was almost proud, like she was complimenting me, like I'd just won something. They had a hard day. Be kind. Kind. That word again. Always tossed my way when I asked for something that might make me visible. I have homework, I muttered, and turned before she could add anything else. I didn't want to see the disappointment that always lived in her eyes when I dared to push back. Back in the kitchen, I opened the freezer and stared for a long time. There were still some meatballs I'd prepped last week. I took them out and began assembling another meal, not because I was hungry anymore, but because something inside me wouldn't let it go. My hands moved automatically. Saucepan, garlic, basil, bread. This time, I didn't just label the container. I took a fresh sheet of paper, bold and white, and wrote in thick all-caps lettering, "Do not touch." I underlined it twice. I taped it to the container like a warning sign at the edge of a cliff. I placed it in the fridge carefully, like setting a trap. As I turned to wash the dishes, I noticed something that hadn't registered before. The plate from earlier, the one they'd eaten from, wasn't in the sink. It wasn't even on the counter. It was clean dried and back in the cupboard. They hadn't just stolen the food. They had erased me. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't about the food anymore. It was about the fact that I didn't exist unless I was feeding someone else. In our house, you're either serving the meal or you're worthy of being served. I was neither. Sunday afternoons used to mean peace. A slow breeze through the curtains, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, maybe the sound of my dad pretending to fix something in the garage just to avoid the rest of us. But not today. Today the house was buzzing, too many voices, too many footsteps. The kitchen was hotter than usual, with 3 trays of sliders stacked on the counter and a bowl of nachos overflowing with cheese, jalapenos, and sour cream. I had barely set down the last tray when Mom's voice rose above the noise like a cymbal crash. "Evan, can you slice more limes for the sodas?" I didn't bother asking why no one else could do it. I already knew the answer. She brushed past me, patting my shoulder in that way that meant she wanted something. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said, glancing at the overflowing counter. "You've got real talent. Your brother's friends are going to love this." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and looked at her. "Am I invited?" She blinked confused for just a second, then laughed like I'd made a joke. "Oh, honey, you'll be too busy in the kitchen. But they'll know you made it. That's what matters." I nodded, but the tightness in my throat wouldn't leave. I wanted to ask if she remembered my 12th birthday, if she remembered how I cried when the cake she promised my cake ended up in front of Kyle's friend because he was crying harder. He had the flu and had to miss his own party the week before. She said I should be the bigger person. I didn't even get a slice. But today wasn't about the past. It was about the now, about pretending I didn't care, that my only role was to feed people who didn't notice I was there. The living room was full of bodies, backpacks, textbooks, open soda cans. Kevin's girlfriend Ashley had claimed the center seat on the couch like it was her throne. She had legs crossed just right, and a laugh that pitched at the perfect angle to make boys lean in. She didn't look up when I carried the first tray out, just waved her hand vaguely. I offered her a napkin. She didn't take it. "Thanks," she said, eyes still on Kevin. "Your brother's food is good." Shame about his face. There was a beat of silence. Then they laughed. Not all at once, but in waves. Kevin chuckled. Kyle slapped his thigh. Someone else muttered, "Damn," under their breath, like it was all part of a game. No one defended me. I didn't flinch. Not on the outside. I just turned and walked back to the kitchen as if I hadn't heard a thing. The tray was lighter, my stomach heavier. I filled another bowl with chips this time, letting my hands move slower. Less precise. Let them wait. From the hallway I could still hear them. Not just the laughter, but the chewing, the casual disregard, the fact that I wasn't even worth a reply. Back in my room, the air was cooler, quieter. The blinds were half drawn, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop on the desk. I sat down, clicked it open, and stared at the essay I'd been working on for 2 weeks. My application draft for Oregon Culinary Institute. Describe a formative experience that shaped your passion for food. I had started with "I learned to cook not because I wanted to, but because no one else would feed me." It felt raw, real. Now it felt stupid. I moved the mouse to the top right corner, closed the tab, opened it again, then hovered over the trash icon. "What's the point?" I whispered. The words felt like vinegar on my tongue. They'll never believe in me anyway. Not Mom. Not Kevin. Not anyone who eats what I make and still doesn't see me. I hit delete. Held it. Emptied the trash folder. Gone. The cursor blinked on a blank page. A mockery. I closed the lid and leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. Somewhere downstairs, another burst of laughter erupted. They were probably on dessert by now, maybe devouring the cookies I'd prepped the night before, not realizing I had separated the dough into labeled containers. Or maybe they knew and didn't care. I ran a hand through my hair, staring at the ceiling. The same patch of peeling paint in the corner. The same spot I'd looked at during every grounding, every failed dinner conversation, every moment I'd wanted to scream and hadn't. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. But something nudged me to look. One new email. The subject line was simple. Still waiting for that essay. Evan. Don't give up. Mrs. Delgado. Her name was like the sound of a match being struck in a dark room. She was the only teacher who'd ever looked me in the eye when I spoke, who had tasted my lemon bars and said, "Don't waste this. Your food says what you're afraid to." I stared at the screen, rereading the sentence. Don't give up. I didn't respond. I didn't open the document again. But I didn't look away either. Every year, their birthday feels like a funeral for my dignity. The grocery list was longer than usual. 3 types of meat, 6 different sauces, 2 gluten-free dessert options for Kyle's friend, and 5 bags of ice. I didn't write the list. Mom had scribbled it on the back of a water bill and left it on the counter next to a $20 bill that might as well have been Monopoly money. Make it stretch, she'd said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And don't forget to marinate the chicken the night before. You know how Kevin gets about dry meat. Kevin. The same Kevin who called me the kitchen elf last week when I brought him his breakfast. The same Kevin who would in a few days be standing in the backyard arms around Kyle while guests toasted their incredible party hosting skills. It was mid-May, which meant barbecue season was officially here. And by barbecue, I mean me standing over the grill while everyone else posed for selfies and downed sodas. Mom caught me reading the list twice, no doubt calculating which corners I'd be forced to cut. They trust your taste, she said as if it were a compliment. Don't mess it up. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because that's what was expected. By the time Saturday arrived, the fridge was packed, and so was the backyard. Balloons hung from the fence posts and folding chairs formed loose clusters on the grass. I set the grill up an hour before anyone arrived, even though no one asked me to. By then I had learned not to wait for instructions. If I wanted the meat to be cooked right, I had to take charge. And if it turned out perfect, someone else would take credit. That was the cycle. A breeze carried the smell of smoke and sizzling sausage across the yard. People began arriving, relatives, neighbors, classmates. Uncle Dave, who always talked like he was announcing a game show, gave Kyle a hearty pat on the back. This spread is insane. You two really pulled it off this year. Kevin raised his cup like he'd just finished a 10-course tasting menu. You know us. Go big or go home. I waited. Maybe someone would correct him. Maybe Mom would speak up, or even one of the guests who'd seen me running around with trays of kebabs and salad bowls. But no one said anything. I approached a woman I vaguely recognized from church. Maybe someone's aunt. She smiled as she bit into a burger. You boys really outdid yourselves. I began voice tight. But before I could finish, Mom materialized behind me like a ghost with a warning bell. Evan, don't make it about you. The woman chuckled awkwardly and walked off. I stood there, heat rising not from the grill but from my chest. It wasn't just the dismissal. It was how casually she said it, like I had reached for something forbidden. Like acknowledgement itself was selfish. I turned back to the food table. The brownies were still in the oven inside. My final touch for the day. I'd spent the morning mixing dark chocolate with espresso powder, something I knew would be a hit. But now I didn't want them to have it. Not anymore. In the kitchen, the timer went off. I reached for the oven mitts. I pulled open the door. And then I stood there, watching. The top layer was perfectly risen, crackling with just the right amount of give. I could smell the richness, the cocoa melting into butter. I didn't move. The timer beeped again. Then I shoved the pan back in and set the temperature higher. I waited. 5 minutes. then 10. Smoke began to curl from the edges. The scent transformed from sweet indulgence to bitter charcoal. I pulled the pan out and dropped it into the trash bin. The metal sizzled against the plastic. I didn't care. No one noticed. Backyard laughter still echoed through the windows. Kyle was probably lining up a photo shoot with the chicken wings. Kevin might have been handing out their brownies, unaware they didn't exist anymore. I walked down to the basement where the air was cool and stale. The shelves were cluttered with paint cans, old board games, tangled Christmas lights. But I wasn't looking for nostalgia. I found it under a dusty blanket, Dad's old security camera, the one he used to install above the garage when we got our first bikes. The wires were still attached, the memory card slot intact. I picked it up and wiped the lens with my sleeve. Let's see what happens when they don't know I'm watching. Some families hand down recipes. Mine hands down silence. The garage always smelled like dust and motor oil, the kind of scent that clings to you long after you've left. Most days it was just a graveyard of unfinished projects, shelves warped with half-used paint cans, a rusted leaf blower boxes filled with tangled cords no one would ever sort through. But tonight I wasn't here to escape. I was here to look. I scanned the back wall where the oldest things were buried behind lawn chairs and useless camping gear. And there it was. A black guitar case wedged between a cooler and a crate of faded holiday decorations. The zipper was stiff, like it hadn't been moved in years. I pulled it out, wiped the top with my sleeve, and carried it over to the workbench. I didn't open it yet. The last time I'd seen it was years ago. I must have been 10. Dad had brought it out one night when Mom wasn't home. He sat on the back step strumming half a tune before stopping to adjust the strings. I remember watching from the window, wondering why the music stopped before it ever really started. By the time Mom returned, the guitar had already been zipped back into its case, stored away like a guilty secret. He hadn't played since. I sat down and finally opened it. The strings were still intact, though slack. The wood was dry, the polish dull. I ran my fingers across the frets and imagined what the guitar might have sounded like if it had been allowed to live. "Why'd you stop?" I asked without looking up. My father's footsteps creaked from the doorway. He stood there for a long moment before answering. "Your grandfather said music wouldn't feed a family." His voice wasn't bitter. It wasn't anything, really, just flat. Like he wasn't talking to me so much as repeating something he'd memorized. "You ever regret it?" I asked. He didn't reply. Silence again. The kind that builds walls instead of bridges. I packed the guitar back into its case and stood up. In the kitchen, the light was still on. The cabinets cast long shadows and the clock ticked too loudly in the stillness. I reached up above the stove to the narrow cupboard no one ever used. Inside it, I tucked the small camera I'd cleaned and tested the night before. It faced down at a wide-angle, perfect view of the counter, the fridge, and the microwave. I tested the feed from my phone. Crystal clear. I didn't smile. I just clicked record and shut the cabinet. The next morning, everything was normal. Mom complaining about the electric bill. Kyle asking where the protein bars were. Kevin claiming he had a late study group. I didn't respond to any of it. I just packed my lunch and waited. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, or at least pretended to, I reviewed the footage. At 11:43 p.m., Kevin entered the kitchen. Shirtless, phone in one hand. He opened the fridge, pulled out the container labeled Evan's Dinner, Do Not Touch, popped it open, and started eating cold pasta straight from the container. No hesitation, no second thoughts. He wasn't even hungry, just bored. He scrolled through his phone with one hand, fork in the other. At one point, he leaned against the counter and smiled at something on his screen, maybe a meme, maybe a girl. Then, he licked the fork clean, tossed the empty container in the trash, and wiped his hands on the towel I used for baking. He never looked up. I saved the footage. Labeled it proof. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet. But for the first time, I wasn't just angry, I was preparing. The door creaked behind me. I turned. Dad stood there, eyes fixed on the screen. I paused the video, suddenly unsure if I wanted him to see it. But he didn't say anything. He walked over to the couch, the guitar case in his hands. He opened it, sat down, and began tightening the strings slowly, methodically, like muscle memory waking from a long sleep. He didn't play. I didn't ask. We sat in silence for a while, me with my proof, him with his regret. That night we didn't say much. But for once, the silence didn't feel like defeat. You only need 2 ingredients to ruin a family: ego and a camera. The room was still, except for the soft hum of my laptop fan and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor beneath my chair. Midnight bled into the corners of the ceiling, turning everything gray. A single desk lamp cast a warm halo over my desk, just enough light to see the files stacking up on the screen. One earbud was in half muted as I clipped together the truth. Clip 1. Kevin walking into the kitchen at 2:17 a.m., pulling open the fridge and laughing to himself as he grabbed my Tupperware. Clip 2. Susan brushing me off again as I pointed out the empty container. Don't be petty, Evan. Her voice sharp but bored. Clip 3. Ashley's voice, that cruel joke she thought was harmless. Your brother's food is good. Shame about his face. Clip 4. Kyle grinning with barbecue sauce on his lips, saying, "We should post this and pretend we made it." Each clip barely 10 seconds, but together they told the story of someone who'd been erased. Quietly. Consistently. I added text over black slides between the videos. Selfish, ungrateful, or just invisible. The cursor blinked at me like it was daring me to stop. I didn't. I clicked to import one more video from the proof folder. This one was tighter, closer. Kyle mid-bite sinking his teeth into the sandwich I'd made that morning, label facing the camera. Do not touch. Right there. Center frame. Unmistakable. I'd zoomed in slightly, not enough to distort it, but just enough so there'd be no excuse. Not a joke. Not a misunderstanding. Just theft, plain and bold. I was adjusting the transitions when the door creaked behind me. I didn't flinch. I'd left it open on purpose. Kevin stood in the doorway, hoodie half-zipped, arms crossed. His expression wasn't angry yet. More curious. But his eyes scanned the screen quickly. You're recording us. I didn't pause the video. I just minimized it, clicked save. You stole my food, I said calmly. I'm stealing the truth. He laughed once, short, forced. You're being dramatic. Am I? I turned to face him. How many meals have you taken from me? How many times did you laugh when they insulted me? You don't even see me unless I'm cooking for you. His jaw clenched. You're making it worse for yourself. You know that. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't start this. But I'm done pretending I'm not in the room. For a moment I thought he'd lunge. He didn't. He just stared like he didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe he didn't. Then he turned on his heel and left without closing the door. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Slower, heavier. Dad. He walked by without a word, didn't even glance in, but I knew he'd heard. Good. I turned back to the screen. A notification pinged in the corner. New email, Mrs. Delgado. Still waiting for that essay? Evan. Don't give up. I stared at it for a moment. The kind of moment you don't realize is a fork in the road until much later. I didn't reply. I added the final clip, the one with Kyle, and placed it at the end of the timeline. The sandwich, the label, his smirk. No voiceover, no music, just silence, and then a fade to black. I clicked Save As, file name, happybirthday.mp4. The screen blinked once. Then the file appeared in my folder, sitting there quietly like a loaded weapon no one knew existed. This wasn't noise. This wasn't shouting. This was me making sure they could finally see what they'd refused to for years. They wanted a birthday party. I gave them a premiere. The backyard smelled like lemon zest and smoke, an odd but deliberate pairing. Bright paper lanterns swayed lazily above the patio, strung across from fence post to fence post, casting patterns of light over the crowd that had already gathered by mid-afternoon. Laughter floated between the clink of soda bottles and the pop of beer cans, echoing through the lawn like background noise to someone else's life. Mine. I stood behind the buffet table watching the flames lick under the grill grates as brisket sliders sizzled and hissed. The lemon herb chicken had already been plated, arranged meticulously with rosemary sprigs and a lemon wedge on each portion. In the cooler, the mango mousse cake sat chilling in its pristine glass dome like a weapon waiting for its cue. Guests swarmed in waves, relatives I hadn't seen in years, friends of Kyle and Kevin who couldn't be bothered to say hello, neighbors who probably didn't even know my name. They weren't here for me. They were here for the twins. Or at least they thought they were. "Oh my God, this chicken is amazing," a woman in a floppy sun hat gushed. Susan, never one to let praise go unattended, smiled sweetly and leaned in. "It's all about balance," she said. "I always told Evan to watch the acidity." I didn't flinch. Not even a blink. That was part of the plan. She hadn't taught me anything except how not to raise a child. Kyle strutted past with Kevin in tow, both in crisp polos and matching sunglasses, nodding smugly as guests clapped them on the back and thanked them for hosting such a great party. They hadn't lifted a single finger, not even to preheat the oven. But it didn't matter. Appearances were everything in this house. I adjusted the lemon slices one last time, then turned to the patio table beside the TV console. A small white napkin lay folded under a bowl of pretzels. No one paid attention as I reached beneath it and slid a tiny USB stick into the back port of the flat screen. A faint blue light blinked once, then disappeared. "Showtime," I murmured. A few minutes later she appeared. Mrs. Delgado. She wore a teal blouse with her gray hair clipped back and sunglasses perched like armor on her head. Her smile was genuine but cautious. She scanned the crowd, then spotted me. "Evan," she said, walking straight over. Susan intercepted her like a security gate. "Oh, Mrs. Delgado. So nice you could make it," she said with the tightest smile imaginable. "Thank you. I wouldn't miss it," Delgado replied coolly. "Evan's told me so much about how hard he's worked for this." Susan's eyes twitched. "Of course. He's always been helpful?" Delgado gave a polite nod and turned toward me, her voice lowering. "This meal has your signature. Own it. No one else can." I gave her a slight nod, half gratitude, half warning. Kevin stood near the drinks cooler staring at me. His brow furrowed and he whispered something to Kyle, who just laughed and shook his head. But Kevin didn't laugh. Not this time. I was smiling a little too easily. And he noticed. The tension vibrated just beneath the surface now. Every plate past every guest who licked their fingers or praised the food was unknowingly walking through a tripwire. At 4:58 p.m., Mark emerged from the kitchen holding a tray of birthday cupcakes. Candles flickered in the breeze as the family began to sing, some more enthusiastically than others. "Make a wish, boys," Susan beamed. Kyle and Kevin leaned in, pretending to blow at the same time. A chorus of claps followed. Then the screen behind them blinked to life. For a moment, no one noticed. The cupcakes were still being passed around. Then one of the younger cousins pointed. "Hey, is that the TV?" The video began. No title, no intro. Just Kevin. He appeared on screen in full clarity, standing in the kitchen late at night opening the fridge. The camera angle was unforgiving, angled downward from the cabinet, showing everything. The sandwich, the label, "Do not touch" in bold marker. Kevin biting into it like it was his birthright. The patio fell quiet. The sound of a fork scraping against a plate froze mid-motion. Someone coughed. Another guest shifted in their seat, the legs of a lawn chair scraping the deck with an audible squeal. Kevin stood perfectly still, face draining of color. The video continued. Silence fractured into stares, darting glances, then a single whispered, "Is that real?" I stood beside the grill, hands folded behind my back. Calm, steady, watching the first domino fall. And this was only the beginning. Some people tear families apart with arguments. I just hit play. The air hung thick with stunned silence as the screen behind the patio flickered through each damning clip, one after the other, like scenes from a crime documentary only half the crowd realized they were part of. Forks stopped midair. Ice melted untouched in red plastic cups. Conversations died so quickly that even the wind seemed hesitant to speak. Kevin's voice echoed out first, the audio crisp, inescapable. "He's basically our sous chef. He just doesn't get paid." Laughter followed, recorded, hollow, merciless. On screen, Kevin leaned against the fridge while Kyle clapped him on the back. A montage of their voices overlapped. "Chill. He always cooks too much anyway. Dude, he gets weird about food. Just ignore him. It's not like he matters." Another clip, Susan in the background stirring a pot. Evan's voice off camera, tentative, tired, I labeled it. Susan cutting in without looking. "It's just food, Evan. Don't be petty." Gasps scattered among the guests like sparks across dry grass. Whispers began to coil beneath the tension, rising and curling. As heads turned, eyes narrowed, and invisible sides began to form. Delgado stood near the table, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a line so thin it was almost invisible. Then came Kyle's voice in real time, sharp and raw. "You filmed us," he barked, stepping forward. "That's sick." His words snapped the room, no, the backyard, out of its trance. People turned toward me. I didn't move. Kyle's face was flushed, fists clenched. "What kind of creep does that? Seriously, in our own house?" Kevin stayed silent. He hadn't moved since the video started, his expression unreadable, somewhere between frozen and ashamed. "I didn't film you," I said quietly, voice steady. "I filmed me being erased." Susan shot up from her chair, face pale but resolute. "That's enough," she hissed, rushing toward the TV console. Her hand reached for the remote, but Kevin caught her wrist. "Everyone noticed. Let it finish." Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. She stared at him, shocked. "What? Let it finish?" He repeated a little louder this time. The video shifted again. This time it was my lasagna, one of the first clips I'd recorded. The clean fridge. The empty Tupperware. The sound of someone off camera licking their fingers. Then silence. Long, weighted silence. I took a step forward into the hush. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't care. "Now you know how it feels," I said, looking directly at Susan, then Kyle, then Kevin. "Being used, then erased." Kyle scoffed. "You're so dramatic." "We were joking. It's food. You act like it's some personal attack." "It is personal," I snapped, "because cooking was the one thing I had that made me feel seen. And every time I tried to own it, you stole it. Mocked it. Acted like I didn't matter unless I was feeding you." No one interrupted this time. Then Delgado stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the patio stone, but her presence was louder than anyone's voice. She turned to Susan slowly, almost too calmly. "This boy," she said, "is more of a man than any of you seem willing to see." Susan opened her mouth, but Delgado didn't wait for a reply. She walked to the dessert table, pulled out a simple white card, and placed it next to the mango mousse cake without a word. Then she turned to me and nodded once, sharp approving, and walked straight out of the backyard. No one followed her. The screen behind us went dark. Chairs shifted. Guests avoided eye contact. A neighbor muttered something about needing to leave. A distant uncle started clearing plates just to have something to do. The party had ended, but not officially. No one wanted to be the first to declare it. Mark stood quietly near the grill, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. Kyle stormed off toward the side gate without another word. Susan stayed frozen eyes, unfocused, her authority bleeding out like air from a balloon. And Kevin turned toward me. His face had changed. Not with rage, not with sarcasm, but with something else entirely. Shame. When the crowd leaves, all that remains is the smell and the guilt. The house smelled like lemon chicken and mango mousse, but not in a way that made anyone hungry. It clung to the walls, the curtains, even the floor, faint reminders of something that should have been joyful, but now just lingered, awkward and stale. I stood in the kitchen, sponge in hand, scrubbing at a baking tray, like it had personally betrayed me. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that echoed. Every time the faucet dripped, it sounded like an accusation. The house was half cleaned, half abandoned. Someone had stacked cups. Someone else had left the garbage overflowing. Plates sat untouched in the sink, like even the dishes didn't want to be part of this family anymore. I was rinsing off a stubborn patch of barbecue sauce when I heard footsteps behind me, careful, hesitant. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Kevin. He didn't speak right away. He just leaned against the counter across from me, arms folded like a barrier. I kept scrubbing. Finally, he said I was a jerk. I kept my eyes on the dish. You were hungry for something, I said quietly, and I became the meal. The words sat between us. I wasn't sure where they came from, but they tasted right. Bitter, but honest. Kevin let out a breath. Not a sigh, just a release, like his lungs had been holding on too long. I guess I never thought about what it cost you, he said. That was the problem, I replied. None of you ever did. He nodded. Slowly. He wasn't trying to fight me this time, and that was new. His posture wasn't defensive, it was deflated. I think he began, voice low. I was just trying not to be the one who failed. Kyle always had it together. You had this cooking thing. Mom made me feel like if I didn't keep up, I'd disappear. I set the tray down and finally looked up. So you stepped on me to stay visible. He flinched. I didn't press further. I didn't have to. The door creaked in the hallway. We both turned. Mark. He didn't say anything. He just walked in, calm and silent, like a breeze that carried no intention of staying. He placed something small on the counter right in the middle between Kevin and me. A guitar pick. Then he turned and left, footsteps soft, retreating down the hallway like he'd already said everything he needed to. We both stared at the pick for a moment. Kevin broke the silence. He used to play all the time when we were little. I remember, I said. Then he stopped. Like he gave up. Kevin looked at me. You're not giving up, though. Are you? I didn't answer. Susan's door had been closed since the last guest left. I hadn't seen her face since the video ended. Her silence used to feel like power, like a constant storm hovering over the house ready to strike. Now it just felt hollow. She was in hiding, not ruling. Kevin tapped his fingers on the countertop. You know, when that video started, I wanted to punch you. Same, I said dryly. He chuckled once, then sobered. But when it kept going, I couldn't stop watching. Because I didn't just see what we did to you. I saw who I let myself become. I turned off the faucet. The last dish was clean. I guess I'm sorry, he added. That's not for me to decide, I said. It's for who you become now. Kevin stared at the floor, then nodded slowly. There was a long silence again. This one didn't hurt as much. Then he said it soft, simple, like it weighed more than he could admit. If you're leaving, I won't stop you. You can only patch a broken home so many times before you realize it's the house that needs to go. The living room was cold that morning. Not from the weather outside, though the clouds were gathering and the wind was loud enough to shake the windows, but from the way no one met each other's eyes. The house had always been quiet in a performative way, like silence was the family's badge of discipline. Now it was quiet like a shipwreck. Susan sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, arms folded, dressed like she was about to go to church, even though no one had mentioned going. I stood at the far end of the room by the window, hands in my hoodie pocket. Kevin leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching like he wasn't sure if he belonged in the conversation or was just stuck in the blast radius. "You embarrassed us," Susan finally said. Her voice cracked at the edges, but not from sorrow, from effort. She was trying to sound composed, but I could hear it slipping. "How could you do that to family?" I let the silence stretch. The wind outside gave me a moment to breathe. "You're only family," I said, "when it's convenient." Susan blinked like I'd slapped her. Maybe I had. Kevin shifted his weight and spoke for the first time since entering. "I owe you money," he said. "For the groceries. All those times." I turned to him. "No, you don't." "I do." "You don't," I said again flatly. "Because I'm not running a restaurant. I'm done pretending this was ever a team effort." Susan opened her mouth, maybe to interject, maybe to apologize. I'll never know. Before she could speak, Mark walked into the room, silent as always. He carried a wooden box, weathered, the kind of thing you find buried in the back of a closet with memories inside. He didn't say anything, just walked over, placed it on the coffee table in front of me, and took a step back. I looked at him. He gave a small nod. I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a carving knife. The handle was dark with age, the blade worn but still sharp. On the spine, faintly engraved DF. My grandfather's initials. "You kept this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Mark nodded again. "He gave it to me," he said. "But I never earned it." "You did." It was the most he'd said to me in weeks. I ran my fingers along the hilt. It fit perfectly in my palm. The phone rang. Susan moved to get it, but Kevin was closer. He answered. "Evan," he said, holding the phone out to me. "It's Mrs. Delgado." I took it, the knife still in my hand. Evan Delgado's voice came through, steady, confident. "They accepted your essay. Oregon Culinary. You've got a full scholarship." For a second I couldn't speak. The storm outside cracked like applause. "Evan," she said again. "I'm here," I said. Kevin watched me. Susan sat frozen. Mark stood tall behind me like a quiet pillar. I stared at the knife. Then the kitchen. The counter where I used to label food that would vanish. The oven where I baked for people who never said thank you. The fridge that always felt more like a vault than a part of the house. This wasn't my prison anymore. It was my launch pad. I held the phone back to my ear. "When's the next bus to Portland?" It wasn't a farewell dinner. It was a declaration. The kitchen had never been this quiet. Not quiet like guilt or grief. Quiet like closure. The kind of silence that didn't press on your chest, it just let you breathe. I stood in front of the oven apron, tied loosely around my waist for what might have been the last time. On the counter sat the mixing bowls, a cooling rack, a grater, and ingredients I knew by touch more than sight. I hadn't looked up a recipe. I didn't need to. My hands remembered. Chocolate almond cake, orange glaze, the same one I made for my 13th birthday. The one they devoured before I ever got a slice. But this wasn't revenge. Not anymore. This was mine. I cracked the eggs, folded the batter, and poured it into the pan like it was muscle memory. My movements were steady. No anger, no sadness. Just a deep, resounding certainty. Behind me, I heard the floor creak. Kevin. He hovered in the doorway like he was afraid to interrupt a ceremony. He wore an old hoodie and sweatpants, face half shadowed by the kitchen light. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, wordlessly, he walked over, picked up a second bowl, and started cracking eggs into it. Not the way I would. He got some shell in, but I didn't correct him. "I figured you'd be here," he said quietly. I nodded, focused on grating the orange peel. He started to speak again, hesitated, then tried a new route. "You're really going?" "Yeah," I said. "You know, I was never Trying to be cruel, right? You were trying to be comfortable, I replied, and I was an easy sacrifice. He didn't argue. The cake went into the oven. The smell spread like a memory you didn't realize you'd missed. For once, it didn't feel like I was cooking for anyone else. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't me proving worth. This was me saying goodbye. We sat at the small kitchen table with two mismatched plates and a single fork each. I cut the cake neat, precise, and slid a piece to Kevin. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It just was. He took a bite and let out a small, surprised laugh. Still better than anything from the bakery. I smirked. Don't act so shocked. We ate in intervals of silence and soft remarks. For the first time, it felt like talking to a brother, not an audience. Mark entered halfway through. He didn't say a word, just started rinsing dishes, wiping down counters. He wasn't escaping through silence tonight. He was showing up in it. I finished my slice, stood up, and removed the apron, folded it carefully, and hung it on the hook beside the pantry door. It looked smaller than I remembered. Kevin watched me as I walked over to the counter and started packing a small canvas bag. A knife set, a worn recipe notebook, a couple of changes of clothes. That's it, he asked. That's all I need, I replied. He stood too. I hope someone out there sees you the way I should have. I stopped at the fridge, pulled a magnet off the top corner and placed a note underneath. 4 words. Black ink. Block letters. Feed yourselves now. And then, without looking back, I stepped into the hallway out the front door and into the soft wind of a Portland-bound night. Some weapons don't draw blood. They carve paths. The morning air pressed against my face like an unopened letter, cool, uncertain, waiting to be read. I zipped up the last corner of my worn-out duffel bag, its seams bulging with just enough clothes, notebooks, and kitchen tools to feel like a future. The carving knife, its handle smooth and aged, lay wrapped in a dish towel at the top, placed not out of sentimentality but necessity. Legacy doesn't always come in frames or blessings. Mark stood at the bottom of the stairs, keys in hand, his eyes scanning the driveway like it might disappear if he blinked too long. We didn't say much. We never did. But there was something about the way he nodded at my bag, then at me, that felt like a quiet contract, no signatures needed. Kevin shuffled out from the hallway, still in his hoodie, hair sticking in odd directions. In his hand, a crinkled brown paper bag. Homemade trail mix, he said, voice low. I didn't know what else to give you. And a note. He passed the bag to me and looked away before I could open it. I felt the weight of it in my hand, the awkward weight of someone trying to say too much in a single gesture. I'm not mad, I said, slipping the bag into my backpack. You should be. I was. That was enough for him? He gave a nod that almost became a bow before stepping back inside. At the doorway, Susan stood like a statue, draped in denial. Her arms were crossed tightly, lips pressed into a line that tried to say authority, but only echoed distance. I met her eyes once. She looked like she wanted to speak. Her mouth moved slightly, a breath drawn, but no words came. For a moment, I waited. Then I turned and walked past her. Each step across the porch felt less like leaving and more like waking up. The car door opened with a soft creak. I tossed my bag in the back seat and slid into the front. Mark started the engine but didn't drive yet. I almost left once he said, staring ahead. Long time ago, I had a chance to tour with a jazz trio. They needed a rhythm guitarist. What happened? My father happened. Said music was a hobby, not a life. Told me a man feeds his family first. I listened. And do you regret it? Every single time I look at that guitar, I never played again. We sat in that silence for a minute, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Then I said it, not as a declaration, not even as comfort, just truth. Then I'll play mine loud enough for both of us. Mark nodded. It wasn't a blessing, not a goodbye. Just a recognition. As we pulled away from the house, the driveway shrank behind us. I saw Kevin standing behind the curtain, a faint silhouette in the living room window. Susan was gone from the porch. The screen door tapped once in the wind. My fingers gripped the strap of my bag as if grounding myself. But I didn't cry. Not even a lump in my throat. Just breath. Slow, even mine. The road opened ahead, lined with trees that had seen more exits than arrivals. I didn't know exactly what would happen in Portland, what kitchen I'd find myself in, what burns or praises would greet me. But for the first time in years, I felt full. Freedom doesn't smell like flowers. It smells like burnt rice and rookie mistakes. The dorm smelled like overcooked ambition. A faint scorch lingered in the air, burnt rice to be exact, and it was mine. I stood in the tiny communal kitchen space with a spatula in one hand and a now blackened saucepan in the other. My first group cooking project at the Oregon Culinary Academy, and I had already reduced jasmine rice to char. Steam still hissed as I dumped it into the trash. A few students glanced over, pretending not to judge. "Hey man," Mateo said, sauntering in from the hallway with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. "That pan just die in your arms." He grinned, brushing a lock of curly hair from his forehead. I didn't look at him. I didn't have the bandwidth for jokes. "I had it under control," I said flatly, rinsing the pot under cold water. Mateo raised an eyebrow but didn't push it. "Sure. You want to tag in on sauce duty, or?" I said I've got it. Truth was I didn't. My hands were still shaking. Not from the rice, but from the fact that I wasn't in control anymore. This wasn't my kitchen. These weren't my rules. I was no longer the ghost behind the curtain who made everything taste good without being seen. Here, I was seen. And I was failing. The afternoon didn't improve. We plated our team dish, a pan-seared salmon with rice pilaf and wilted greens, and brought it to the instructor's table. Chef Annalise stood like a sculpture carved from marble. White jacket, crisp arms folded. Her eyes scanned our plates like they had personally insulted her. She tasted the rice first. Winced. Dry. Overheated. "The flavors are anxious." She locked eyes with me. "You cook like someone still feeding ghosts." My jaw tensed. What if those ghosts raised me? But I didn't say it. I just nodded, took my plate, and walked off. Later that evening, the dorm was quiet. Mateo was out, probably somewhere making people laugh or flirting with someone across campus. I stayed in alone in the shared kitchenette with nothing but a small bag of rice, a non-stick pan, and a desire to get it right. I washed the rice until the water ran clear, let it soak, measured everything by hand. No shortcuts, no rush. Just me and the rhythm of patience, the hiss of the pot, the steady bubbling, the warm, humid aroma that slowly filled the room. This time, it didn't burn. I plated it in a deep white bowl, just rice, no garnish, no performance. I sat at the small dining desk in our dorm and took the first bite. It was soft, subtle, comforting. No one else would taste it. No one needed to. For the first time, the flavor was just for me. The door creaked open behind me. Mateo stepped in, holding a drink in one hand and a paper cup in the other. "Yo," he said. "Damn, smells way better in here now." I nodded. He took a seat on his bed and sipped something that looked too sugary to be coffee. Then came the question I didn't expect. "Next week is family week. You inviting anyone?" I didn't answer right away. He glanced over. "No pressure, man. Some people don't. Just thought I'd ask." I set my spoon down slowly. No one would come. You can leave a house behind. The silence follows. The Culinary Academy lounge was quieter than usual. Late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, brushing against the tables where half-finished projects and empty espresso cups waited to be cleaned up. My name had been on the bulletin board for a full hour before I walked over to check it again. Selected Northwest Regional Student Showcase June 21st. Participant Evan Mallory. Main dish open proposal. A showcase, the biggest one of the semester. The kind of thing students planned their entire year around. I didn't feel proud. I felt hollow. I sat on the worn blue couch in the corner of the lounge and stared out the window. In the reflection, I saw my own expression too still, too unreadable. Like a boy waiting for applause that would never come. The echo of a voice whispered in my memory. Don't be dramatic. You'll thank us one day. Susan's words from 100 fights ago still hitchhiking on my thoughts. Mateo passed by and offered a subtle thumbs up when he saw my name on the list. I nodded back. I didn't tell him I hadn't signed the confirmation form yet. I wasn't sure I deserved the spot. A shadow crossed the glass of the entrance door. At first, I thought it was another student or maybe a delivery guy. But then the door creaked open and in walked Kevin, wearing a wrinkled gray hoodie jeans too clean for travel and holding something in his hand, a photograph. The air in the lounge tightened around me. He stopped a few steps in. Hey. My throat was dry. You came here. Yeah, he said, walking over and extending the photo. Found this in one of Mom's old recipe books. It was a picture of me maybe 10 years old flipping pancakes with a spatula twice the size of my hand, batter on my cheek, a grin I didn't recognize anymore. We stood in silence. Then I said, I thought we were done talking. He nodded, still holding the photo. Yeah, I thought so too, but I'm not really here to talk. Just to say what I should have said earlier. I waited. There's a cafe across the street, he added. You mind we ended up at a small corner place with chalkboard menus and chipped mugs, the kind of cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and good intentions. Kevin sat across from me, fidgeting with the sleeve of his hoodie. I watched him, unsure whether I wanted this to be sincere or over quickly. I was an ass for a long time. He began avoiding my eyes. I thought the way to win in our family was by being the loudest. You were always steady, quiet, good, and I couldn't handle that. I stayed silent. I tried to win by making you small, he said. I'm done doing that. The waitress dropped off 2 coffees. I didn't reach for mine. Kevin continued. I dropped out. Business school wasn't me. I think I'm applying to a community arts program. Illustration. I blinked. That was unexpected. Not because I didn't think he could, but because he'd never said anything before. I was drawing before I could read, he said with a shrug. Dad found some of my sketchbooks. Didn't say anything, but didn't throw them away either. Another long pause. Do you hate me? He finally asked. I leaned back, hands wrapped around the warm mug. I think I finally don't need to answer that. Kevin looked at me a little stunned, then nodded slowly. Fair. We sat there with the kind of silence I'd grown used to, not the empty kind, not the hostile kind. Just the quiet that followed when people stopped trying to be right. After a while, Kevin reached into his backpack and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. You might want this, he said. I kept it. Figured it might belong in your future, not our past. I opened it carefully. Inside was my old recipe journal, the one I thought I'd lost 2 years ago. Pages, dog-eared edges, worn ink, smudged from use. My handwriting from a younger, more hopeful version of myself stared back at me. Labeled tabs, holiday dishes, experiments, dream menus. My fingers paused on the first page. Recipe number 1, pancakes. For me. Sometimes you cook for applause, sometimes for survival. But the best meals. Their forgiveness on a plate. The kitchen was a stage, and for once I wasn't hidden behind the curtain. I adjusted the cuffs of my white chef coat, fingers trembling slightly, though I kept my head still. The main hall of the Oregon Culinary Academy buzzed with hushed anticipation. Judges leaned forward behind polished tables. Spotlights hovered like curious eyes. Cameras clicked in the corners, their flashes bouncing off stainless steel. Mateo flashed a quick thumbs up from across the room before slipping behind the prep station. I returned the gesture with a tight smile. Today wasn't just a competition. It wasn't even just a showcase. It was a reckoning. My station was pristine. Prepped, garlic-chopped, rosemary-marinated chicken thighs. The saffron rice was measured and ready, soaking with the care of someone who'd learned through fire and failure that rushing wasn't the same as mastering. I inhaled deeply. The same scent from 1,000 kitchens before, but today it didn't haunt me. It grounded me. Chef Annalise passed by with her clipboard, stopping just long enough to say, "This time, don't feed the ghosts. Feed your future." I gave her a quiet nod. The sear of the chicken hit the pan and the sound echoed with approval. The rosemary sizzled. The saffron bloomed its golden color into the rice like ink in water. My movements were automatic, but my mind was calm, like I'd finally stepped into a version of myself I'd only imagined. When I plated the dish garlic rosemary chicken over a soft bed of saffron rice garnished with thin curls of lemon zest and microgreens, I didn't doubt it. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I stepped back as the judges approached. They murmured, nodded, cut into the chicken, tasted the rice. The silence stretched long enough to make my ribs tighten. Then one of them smiled. Another took a second bite. "Elegant, balanced, honest," one judge said. Applause broke out as I stepped off stage. Not thunderous, but warm, steady, earned. And then I saw him. Mark. Standing at the back of the room, half in shadow, dressed like he'd walked in from somewhere far away. He didn't clap, didn't wave, but he nodded once his mouth pressed into a line that wasn't disappointment anymore. It was pride, or maybe relief. I didn't move, didn't need to. He saw me, fully, for the first time, maybe ever. When I returned to the dorm hours later, the adrenaline finally began to settle. My station partner had already left. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fridge. On my desk beside the framed bulletin from the showcase was a folded piece of lined paper. No envelope. Just a quiet presence. I opened it slowly. "You're no longer my silent son. You're your own man. Dad." I read it twice. The paper shook a little in my hand, but I didn't cry. I wasn't empty anymore, just full in a way I didn't have words for. I turned to my laptop, opening it without thinking, ready to submit my post-showcase report. But a new email sat at the top of my inbox. Subject: opportunity. Immediate response. Requested from Mrs. Delgado. Message preview. France wants you. I clicked it open. A summer internship at a bistro in Lyon. They saw your showcase video. I sent it with your permission in mind. Let me know by tomorrow. Flights can be arranged. I sat back slowly, hands still hovering above the keyboard. There it was. The next kitchen. The next story. Not survival. Not revenge. Just something new. Something mine. I thought I needed to be seen. Turns out I just needed to see myself. The airport cafe was half awake, much like the people in it. A scattering of bleary-eyed travelers clutched coffee cups like lifelines, their voices muffled by sleep and departure. Outside, the sky was still deciding whether it wanted to be morning or something more forgiving. Light seeped slowly between clouds, like it too was boarding a flight to somewhere better. I sat alone by the window, a small table tucked near the edge of the terminal. My coffee was black, slightly bitter, but warm in my palms. I didn't mind the taste anymore. I'd grown into it. My worn leather backpack sat at my feet. Inside it, tucked carefully between clothes and travel documents, were 3 things heavier than they looked. Mark's knife, handed to me like an heirloom without words. Kevin's journal, my old one, returned full of messy bookmarks and side notes. Delgado's folded note, the one that opened a door across an ocean. I pulled out a worn page of my own recipes, scanning over them with a faint smile. Garlic rosemary chicken, lemon mousse, that disastrous rice I'd eventually redeemed. There was no audience here, no family waiting to tell me what I should have done differently. Just the quiet hush of engines spinning and strangers crossing into their next chapter. Yo Mateo's voice pulled me from the page. He dropped into the seat across from me, breathless from jogging through security. Didn't think I'd make it. I raised an eyebrow. You came all the way here just to see me off? He grinned and pulled out a folded piece of paper from his hoodie. I came to deliver this. I took it. At the top, in Mateo's messy, slanted handwriting, top 5 meals we'll make when you come back. Beneath it, real ramen, not the instant stuff. Your mom's lasagna recipe, but without the family drama. Saffron rice, no pressure. Something French, badly pronounced but cooked perfectly. Whatever you invent next. Number 5's the wild card, he said, nudging the paper toward me like it was a contract. Figure you'll come back with something we've never even tasted before. I might, I said, folding the list carefully and sliding it into my backpack. Overhead, a soft voice echoed through the terminal. Flight 204 to Lyon, now boarding at gate A4. Mateo stood with me, clapped me on the shoulder. You're gonna kill it over there, he said. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need repeating. As I walked toward the gate, I thought about my first steps into the culinary world, hidden behind kitchen doors, stealing minutes to taste something I wasn't allowed to enjoy. Now I was boarding a plane, not for escape, but for expansion. No one was pushing me. No one was guilt-tripping me into it. This path was mine. I paused at the gate entrance, glancing once at the sunrise that now painted the sky in soft oranges and pale blue. Then I stepped forward. The plane was quiet, full of murmuring passengers and the low whir of air vents. I took the window seat, tucked my backpack beneath the seat in front of me, and leaned back as the cabin lights dimmed. The engines roared softly. We began to move. The ground fell away beneath us. I didn't cry. I didn't tense. I just closed my eyes, resting my head against the cool window, and for the first time I didn't dream of applause or forgiveness. I dreamed of flavors yet to be discovered. Some meals are best served after you've walked away from the table. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together.